The distress call from the farm moon had been crossing empty space for 9 days before anything alive bothered to hear it. The packmaster Sarun Vesh heard it the way a hunter hears a small animal breathing in the dark. He was old for his kind, and old in his trade, and he had stripped more colonies than he could count without help from a tally keeper. He had a tally keeper anyway, 3 decks below him, who counted such things so the reaving could brag about them later. The number that morning stood at 411 worlds emptied. The farm moon would be 412. Sarun listened to the call from a high seat aboard his reaving ship, the Long Hunger, and he smiled the way his people smiled, which was not a kind expression. The voice on the call was young. It was a girl's voice, careful and even, repeating the same words over and over in the cheap trade tongue every poor colony used when it could not afford a real one. "This is Aldwin's Reach," she said. "We are 11,040 people. We grow grain, and we keep animals, and we have no warships and no weapons that matter. A raiding fleet is 12 days out and closing. We are asking anyone who can hear us. Please, we are asking for help." Sarun had heard 10,000 calls like it. He knew exactly how this story went, because he had written it 411 times. A colony saw the raiders coming. The colony screamed into the dark. The dark did not answer, because the dark never answered. No one came for grain farmers. No one crossed real distance to die for strangers who could not pay. That was the first law of the deep, older than any empire, and the reaving had built its whole long life on it. So Sarun did not hurry. He let his fleet drift toward Aldwin's Reach at a lazy pace. 300 reaving ships in a loose dark cloud, in no rush at all. Let the girl call, he thought. Let her call until her voice broke. The calling was part of the harvest. Fear seasoned a world before the taking, the way salt seasoned meat. He played the call again on the bridge speaker so his packs could enjoy it. "We are asking anyone who can hear us," the girl said. "Please." His packs laughed. They were good at laughing. It was most of what they did between worlds. On the farm moon, the girl with the careful voice was named Tova Lin, and she was 17 years old, and she had not slept in 2 days. She sat in the colony's one signal shack, a tin room on the edge of the grain fields, with a headset pressed to her ears and her hands flat on a desk that her grandfather had built. She had been chosen for the signal duty because her voice was clear and because she could keep it steady, and because the older operators had families to gather and she did not. Her family was the colony, all 11,040 of them. She had sent the call 61 times. She had aimed it at every star the old maps said might hold someone friendly. She had aimed it at empires that had never once written back. She had aimed it at silence, because silence was the only neighbor a frontier farm moon ever really had. And on the 61st call, something answered. It was not words. It was a single tone, low and clean, that slid into her headset and sat there like a held breath. Then a string of numbers came after it, in a format her old equipment almost could not read. She fed it through the colony's only translation slate, and the slate worked for a long, frightening moment, and then it put 4 plain words on the screen. "We heard you. Hold." Tova read the words 3 times. She did not let herself believe them. Belief was dangerous when raiders were 12 days out, but she keyed the channel and she sent back the only thing she could think of, which was the truth. "We have no defenses," she said. "We have 9 days of food past the deadline and no way to run. There are 11,040 of us. If you are coming, how long?" The answer came back faster than it should have, faster than the distance allowed, which she did not understand and would not understand for a long time. "We are already moving," the reply said. "Keep the call open. Do not stop talking. We want to hear that you are still there." So Tova Lin talked. She talked through the night while the colony's elders argued about whether to believe her. She talked while the grain keepers walked the fields and counted what they could carry into the deep tunnels. She talked while children were carried sleeping to the rock cellars under the meeting hall. She told the voice on the channel everything, because it had asked her to keep talking and she did not want it to think the line had gone dead. She told it that Aldwin's Reach had been settled 40 years ago by people who wanted nothing but quiet. She told it about the grain that grew silver under the moon's pale star. She told it about her grandfather, who had built the signal shack with his own hands, and had told her, before he died, that the deep was empty, and that no one was coming, and that they would have to be their own salvation. She told it she had never believed him, even when she should have. The voice listened. Sometimes it asked a small question. How many children? How deep are the cellars? How thick is the rock above them? She gave it numbers, and it took them in, and it said, "Good, that is good. Keep them there." And 11 light days away, aboard the Long Hunger, the packmaster Sarun Vesh picked up the colony's chatter on his own scanners and frowned for the first time. Someone was talking back to the farm moon. He could not hear the words. The distant signal was too thin and too strange, folded in a way his readers had never seen, as though whoever sent it did not care to be understood by anyone but the girl. But he could see that a second voice existed. He could see that the colony's calling had, against every law of the deep, been answered. Sarun was not afraid. He had answered such calls himself, in his way, by arriving. He assumed some poor neighbor had heard the girl and was sending comfort it could not back up. A grain barge, perhaps. A relief ship full of medics and blankets. The deep was full of soft creatures who sent comfort instead of weapons. The reaving ate them too. So he told his tally keeper to mark the world as a richer prize than expected, because now there might be 2 ships to take instead of 1. And he let the Long Hunger drift on toward Aldwin's Reach, in no rush at all, 300 reaving ships behind him like a held breath of his own. He should have hurried, because the thing that had answered the girl was not a grain barge, and it was not a relief ship, and it was not soft. It was the first scout of an armada, and the armada had a name, and the name was the Bright Verdict, and behind that single scout there were 9,000 human warships already turning their bows toward a farm moon they had never seen, crewed by people who had decided, a long time ago and entirely on their own, that a distress call was a promise, and that promises got kept. The girl did not know that yet. The packmaster did not know it at all, but the dark between the stars, which had been empty for 411 worlds, was about to stop being empty. And Sarun Vesh, who had built his whole long life on the first law of the deep, was about to learn that humans had never agreed to it. The scout that had answered the call was a small ship by human standards, which meant it was the size of the colony's entire grain silo district, and it carried a crew of 40. Its name was the Quiet Word, and its captain was a man named Hollis Gareth, who was 51 years old and had a face that did not waste expressions. He had run the far edge of human space for 19 years, listening. That was his whole job. He sat at the lip of the deep, where the maps gave out, and he listened for voices that no one else would hear, and when a voice came, he answered it before he asked permission, because asking permission cost hours, and hours cost lives. When Tova Lin's call had reached him on the 61st try, Gareth had already been moving for 6 minutes. He had logged the colony's position, confirmed the radar track, and sent a single compressed burst back toward human space, along a relay line that the reaving had never imagined could exist. The burst was 4 words long. 11,000. Send everything. He did not know yet whether everything would come. That was not his decision. His decision was to keep the girl talking, and to put the Quiet Word between a farm moon and 300 reaving ships, and to buy whatever time 40 humans and 1 small hull could buy. So he kept her talking. He learned her name on the 2nd hour. He learned about the silver grain and the dead grandfather and the rock cellars. He fed her numbers back, calm and small, because a calm voice was a kind of shield, and he intended to hold it over her for as long as the line stayed open, and he watched the reaving come. He watched them the way Sarun had watched the colony, except that Gareth did not smile. He counted the 300 reaving ships, and he read their hulls, and he understood, in the cold professional way of a man who had seen the after-pictures of emptied worlds, exactly what they were. They were strippers. They were not built to fight a fleet. They were built to fall on the helpless, to peel a world open, to carry off its grain and its metal and its people and leave nothing behind but tunnels full of frightened children who had run out of food. 300 of them was enough to do that 10 times over to a place like Aldwin's Reach. 300 of them was not nearly enough for what was coming the other way. But the Armada was 9 days out at its best speed, and the reaving was 12 days out and closing, and somewhere in the middle of those numbers was the gap that would decide whether 11,040 people lived or died. Gareth's job was to make the gap survivable. He set the quiet word adrift along the colony's outer edge, dark and quiet as its name, and he waited, and he kept the girl talking, and he counted hours. On the long hunger, the packmaster Sarun Vesh grew bored of being patient. He had savored the harvest long enough. The second voice on the colony channel had not turned into a fleet. It had not turned into anything but more talking. He decided it was exactly what he had assumed, some soft neighbor offering comfort, and comfort did not stop a reaving, so he gave the order to close. 300 reaving ships shook off their lazy drift and began to run, hard, toward a farm moon that had 11,040 people in it and 9 days of food. The closing cut the timeline. 12 days became 7. 7 would become 5. Gareth felt the reaving go to full burn, and he understood what it meant. The gap had just narrowed. The Armada was still days away, and the strippers were going to reach Aldwin's Reach first. He keyed his channel to human space and sent his second burst. They have gone to full closing speed. Contact in 5 days. I am one ship. Advise. The relay carried his words across a distance that should have taken weeks and delivered them in hours, because the bright verdict did not move through the deep the way other fleets did, and because the relay had been waiting on this exact frontier for a long time, listening, the way Gareth listened. The answer came back in 90 minutes, and it did not come from a relief office or a debate hall. It came from the bridge of the flagship of Earth's mightiest armada, a vessel 11 kilometers long, named the Far Shepherd, and it was signed by the only authority the situation required. "Hold the line," the answer said. "We are coming faster than they are. Keep the girl talking." Gareth read it, and let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Then he opened his channel to Aldwin's Reach. "Tova," he said, "they are running now. The raiders. You are going to feel it in a few days, them getting close. I need you to hear me and believe me. We are running too, and we are faster." There was a pause on the line. When the girl answered, her voice had not broken, but it had thinned, and he could hear in it the cost of 2 days without sleep. "How many are you?" she asked. Gareth looked at the track of the bright verdict, which his scout could see, and the reaving could not, because the Armada was still folded into the deep, on a path the strippers had no instruments to read. He looked at the number that the Far Shepherd had sent him, the number of hulls turning toward a farm moon, and he decided that the girl had earned the truth. "Enough," he said. "More than enough. Just keep them in the cellars, Tova. Keep them deep, and keep talking to me." She kept talking. She talked through the 3rd day, when the reaving crossed into the range where the colony's own crude scopes could finally see them, 300 dark shapes growing in the sky like a stain. She talked through the panic that ran through the tunnels when the farmers saw them with their own eyes, the old certainty rising up, the grandfather's certainty, that the deep was empty and no one was coming and they would have to be their own salvation and they had no way to be. She talked the elders back down. She told them about the second voice. She told them help was real, and help was running, and help was faster, because Gareth had told her so, and she had decided to believe a man she had never seen over a fear she had carried her whole life. She did not know if she was lying. She decided it did not matter. A calm voice was a kind of shield, and she would hold it over 11,000 people for as long as the line stayed open. She had learned that from Gareth without him ever teaching it. On the 4th day, the reaving reached the edge of the system, and the packmaster Sarun Vesh saw the farm moon clearly for the first time, and he saw something parked at its outer edge that made him slow down. It was one ship, small, dark, a scout hull no bigger than a heavy stripper, sitting alone in the path between the reaving and its prize like a single guard at the gate of a city. Sarun studied it and laughed. So this was the second voice. One ship, one small ship, sent to comfort a doomed colony and to die beside it. He had expected as much. He almost respected it, in the way a hunter respects an animal that turns to face the pack instead of running. The respect did not slow his hand, it never did. He hailed the quiet word, because the reaving liked to speak to the things it ate. He spoke in the trade tongue, so the colony could hear it too, so the girl could hear it, because fear was part of the harvest. Small ship, Saroon said, you answered a call you should have let die. Now you will die with it. Stand aside and I will let your 40 crew flee back into the dark. Stand in my path and I will strip you with the world. Choose. The answer from the quiet word came in the same trade tongue, so everyone could hear it, and it was not afraid, and it was not a plea. I am not the help, the small ship said. I am the one who answers the door. The help is behind me. Saroon read those words, and felt, for the first time in 411 worlds, a thin, cold thread of something he did not have a name for. He pushed it away. Soft creatures bluffed when they were cornered. He had heard 1,000 brave words from things that died screaming an hour later. He gave the order to take the scout. A dozen reaving ships peeled off the cloud and rushed the quiet word, expecting to swallow it. The quiet word did not let itself be swallowed. It moved. For a small ship it moved in a way that the stripper's readers could barely follow, sliding through the dozen attackers, never where they expected it, and it did not fire to kill. It fired to cripple. It put precise, surgical strikes into the strippers' engines, and their grappling rigs, and their stripping arms, the tools they used to peel worlds, and it left their crews alive, and their hulls drifting useless. In 11 minutes the quiet word disabled 12 reaving ships, and did not destroy one of them, and then it slid back into the gate position at the colony's edge, and went quiet again, dark as its name. Saroon Vesh stared at 12 of his ships drifting helpless, and understood that he had just watched a single human scout choose mercy, and that the mercy was worse than killing, because it meant the scout had not been trying. The scout had been demonstrating. It had been buying time and making a point at the same time, and the point was that the small ship at the gate could have killed 12 of his strippers and had decided not to, the way a person decides not to step on something small. For the first time, the packmaster stopped laughing. He pulled the rest of his fleet back from the gate. He would not feed his ships to that scout 12 at a time. He would mass them, all 300 minus the 12, and he would roll over the small ship in a single wave too thick to dodge, and then he would take the world. It would cost him an hour. It would cost the colony everything. He gave the order. 288 reaving ships drew together into a wall and began to advance on the quiet word and the farm moon behind it. In the signal shack, Tova Lin watched the stain in the sky thicken into a solid front and felt her careful voice finally start to shake. She keyed the channel to Gareth. "They are all coming," she said. "All of them at once. Your ship cannot stop all of them. I can do the math. You cannot." "I know," Gareth said, and his voice was still calm, still a shield. "I am not going to stop all of them, Tova. I do not have to. I just have to still be here when the rest of us arrive." "When?" she said. "Tell me when." "Not enough. Not soon. When?" There was a pause. Gareth looked at the track of the bright verdict, the great folded path of 9,000 hulls, the position of the far shepherd at its heart, and he did the arithmetic he had been doing in his head for 4 days, and for the first time the answer fit inside the gap. "Look up," he said, "not at the raiders, past them, at the empty dark behind your own star, where there is nothing. Watch that part of the sky, Tova. In 1 hour, it is going to stop being empty, and when it does, I need you to do one thing for me." "What?" she said. "Tell the people in the cellars to come up," Gareth said. "Not yet. In an hour. When the dark behind your star lights up, bring them up out of the tunnels and let them see it with their own eyes, because they have spent 40 years being told the deep is empty and no one is coming, and in 1 hour, the deep is going to prove them wrong, and I want every one of those 11,040 people to be looking the right way when it does." Tova Lin looked up through the signal shack's one cracked window, past the advancing wall of strippers, at the empty black behind the colony's pale star. She did not see anything yet, but she believed, now, that she would. Aboard the Long Hunger, Sarun Vesh ordered the wall of his fleet forward, and the strippers began their run on the one small ship and the helpless world, and the packmaster told himself the cold thread in his chest was nothing, was the strangeness of a brave scout, was a thing that would pass the moment the world was taken and the tally read 412. He had built his whole long life on the first law of the deep. No one comes for grain farmers. No one crosses real distance to die for strangers. The dark does not answer. He had 58 minutes left to believe it. The last hour before the dark filled was the longest hour Aldwin's Reach had ever lived. In the rock cellars beneath the meeting hall, the elders of the colony gathered the people and tried to decide whether to do the thing the human captain had asked. "Come up," he had said. "In 1 hour, when the dark behind your star lights up, bring them up out of the tunnels and let them see it with their own eyes." It was a mad thing to ask. The strippers were almost at the gate. A wall of 288 ships hung in the sky, larger every minute, and the only thing between the colony and the wall was one small scout and a girl's faith. To climb up out of the safe deep rock now, with the storm at the door, went against every instinct a frightened people had. The eldest among them was a grain-keeper named Oren Sable, who was 80 years old and had buried 2 children and a wife, and had settled Aldwin's Reach with his own hands when the silver fields were nothing but bare regolith. He had spent 40 years believing what his generation had all believed, that the deep was empty and that a colony was alone, and he had taught it to the young the way it had been taught to him, the way Tova's grandfather had taught it to her. He did not want to climb up. He wanted his people in the rock where the rock could shield them. But Oren Sable had been listening to the girl in the signal shack on the cellar speakers for 4 days, the way everyone had, and somewhere in those 4 days her steady voice had done to him what it had done to the colony, which was to make a small, impossible thing seem worth believing. So when the hour came near, the old grain-keeper stood up in the crowded dark of the cellar, and he told his people the truth as he now understood it. "I have been wrong my whole life," Oren Sable said. "I taught you all that no one was coming. I believed it. My own father believed it, on a colder world than this one, and it killed him, because when the storm came he did not call, because he was certain calling was a waste of breath. The girl in the shack did not believe me. She called 61 times, and something heard her. I do not know what is coming, but I know it answered, and that is more than the dark has ever done for us, and I am going to go up and look at it, and I am asking you to come up and look with me, because if she is right, then everything I taught you was wrong, and you deserve to see how wrong with your own eyes." So the people of Aldwin's Reach climbed up out of the rock. They came up into the silver fields in the last minutes of the hour, 11,040 of them, the old and the young and the children carried sleeping, and they stood in the grain and turned their faces, on Tova Lin's instruction relayed through the cellar speakers, away from the advancing wall of strippers and toward the empty black behind their own pale star. It was the most dangerous thing a colony under siege had ever done, to leave the shelter and stand exposed in the open. It was an act of pure trust, placed not in their own walls or weapons, of which they had none, but in a voice that had crossed the deep, and a girl who had refused to stop talking. In the signal shack, Tova watched the field fill with her people through the cracked window, and she felt the weight of it settle onto her 17-year-old shoulders, because if the human captain was wrong, if the dark stayed empty even now, then she had just called 11,000 people up out of the only thing that could protect them, to die in the open looking the wrong way. She keyed the channel to Gareth with a voice that, for the first time in 4 days, she was not certain she could keep steady. "They are up," she said. "All of them. They are standing in the field looking at the dark like you told me. If you are wrong, I have killed them. Tell me you are not wrong." "I am not wrong," Hollis Gareth said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before, a kind of fierce gentleness. "Tova, look at the clock, 40 minutes. Look at the dark. I know it is empty right now. I know how it feels to stand in the open with the storm coming and stare at nothing and believe nothing is going to change. I have felt it. My whole people have felt it. A long time ago, and no one came for us, and we lived, and we built a fleet so that the next people who felt it would not have to feel it for nothing. The dark is not going to stay empty. It is full of us, Tova. It has been full of us the whole time. You just could not see it yet. The same way the raiders cannot see what is coming up behind their own backs. Above the silver fields, the packmaster Sarun Vesh advanced his wall and grew uneasy. He could see, through his scopes, that the colony had come up out of its tunnels. He could see 11,000 small, warm shapes standing in the open grain, and he could not understand it. A world under his wall should have been burrowing deeper, not climbing into the light. A world under his wall should have its faces turned toward him, toward the thing that was coming to take it, in fear. Instead, the whole colony stood with its back to him, looking the other way, at the empty dark behind their own star, as though they were waiting for something to arrive from a direction where nothing could possibly come. Sarun did not like things he could not understand. In 411 worlds he had learned to read the behavior of the doomed, and the doomed did not behave like this. He hailed the small scout at the gate again, in the trade tongue, and there was an edge in his voice now that had not been there before. "Why does the world look away from me?" he said. "Why do they stand in the open? What are they waiting for, small ship? Tell me, and I may yet be merciful." The answer from the quiet word was the same calm thing it had been all along, and it was somehow the most frightening sentence Sarun Vesh had ever heard. "They are waiting for the same thing you are about to see," Gareth said. "The difference is that they are looking forward to it. You should turn your ships around, Packmaster. You are about to be the only creature in this sky facing the wrong way." Sarun Vesh did not turn his ships around. A hunter who lost his nerve was already dead, and he would not be the first packmaster in the history of the Reaving to flee a grain moon because its people stood in a field and looked at nothing. He told himself the colony had gone mad with fear. He told himself that madness was just another seasoning. He pressed his wall forward, and he kept his scopes on the 11,000 warm shapes that would soon be his tally's 412th world, and he did not look behind him, because there was nothing behind him but the empty deep he had ruled his whole life. In the field, old Oren Sable stood with his people and stared into the black, and felt the last minutes of the hour crawl past. Nothing was there. The dark behind the star was as empty as it had ever been in his 80 years, as empty as it had been the night his father died refusing to call for help. The old certainty rose up in him one final time, the certainty of a whole lifetime, that the girl had been wrong, and that hope was a cruelty, and that they should never have come up out of the rock. And then, beside him, a child of perhaps 6 years old, who did not carry any of the certainty the old man carried, who had not yet been taught that the deep was empty, tugged at Oren Sable's sleeve and pointed at the dark and said the first words anyone on Aldwin's Reach spoke when it happened. "It is filling," the child said. The dark behind the star stopped being empty 58 minutes later, exactly when the human captain had said it would. It did not happen the way an attack happened. There was no flash, no fire, no sudden roar. The empty black simply filled, the way a room fills when a crowd walks into it, and where there had been nothing there were suddenly ships, and the ships kept coming, and they did not stop coming for a long time. Tova Lin was looking the right way. So were 11,040 people, because she had told them, and they had climbed up out of the rock cellars and stood in the silver grain fields with their faces turned to the dark behind their own star, and they watched the Armada arrive. 9,000 human warships unfolded out of the deep in a single hour. They came in formations the size of small moons, in walls and wedges and great slow spheres, gray and unhurried, blunt and enormous, each hull a city that had decided to go to war. At the center came the Far Shepherd, 11 kilometers of flagship, so large that the colonists at first mistook it for a second star rising. It did not glitter. It did not threaten. It simply was, the way a mountain is, and the sky that had been empty for 40 years was now so full of human iron that the colony's pale star was lost behind it. This was the bright verdict. This was Earth's mightiest armada, the fleet that humanity kept not to conquer but to answer, the fleet that existed for one purpose, which was to make sure that no call ever went unanswered again. It had crossed real distance to die for strangers who could not pay. It had come for grain farmers. It had done the one thing the first law of the deep swore could never happen. And the people of Aldwin's Reach, who had been told their whole lives that no one was coming, stood in the silver fields and wept, because someone had. Old Oren Sable stood among them and could not speak. He had taught a whole generation that the deep was empty. He had said it at firesides and at funerals, and over the graves of his own children, that no one was coming, and that a colony was alone with whatever the dark sent. And now the dark behind his star was so full of human iron that he could not see the star at all, and the lie of his entire long life was being unmade in front of his eyes by 9,000 ships that had crossed real distance to keep a promise to a girl. He put his old hand on the shoulder of the child who had spoken first, the child of 6, who had never been taught the lie, and so had been the first to see the truth filling the sky, and he held on, because his legs would not hold him alone. "It is filling," the child had said. The old man understood now that he should have been the one to say it, decades ago, to a sky he had been too afraid to trust. The child looked up at him and asked the only question a child would ask, which was whether the big ships were friends. Oren Sable found his voice for that, if for nothing else, and he said yes. "Yes," he said. "They are friends. They came because we called. Remember this. When you are old, and someone tells you the deep is empty, you tell them what you saw today. You tell them you watched it fill." The child nodded the way children nod at things too large to hold, and went on watching the iron come down, and Oren Sable went on holding the small shoulder, and that was how the oldest creature on Aldwin's Reach passed the truth to the youngest, in a silver field, beneath the largest armada the deep had ever seen. Aboard the Long Hunger, the packmaster Sarun Vesh watched the dark fill, and the cold thread in his chest finally had a name, and the name was Terror. His scanners, which had read 300 reaving ships as a great force an hour ago, now strained and failed and strained again, because they had never been built to count a number that large. 9,000. The tally keeper 3 decks below him said the number aloud, and then said it again, because he did not believe it the first time. 9,000 warships, each one larger than the Long Hunger, had arrived behind a farm moon that grew grain and kept animals and had no weapons that mattered. Sarun did the only arithmetic that mattered now, 288 against 9,000. There was no version of that number that ended with the reaving alive. He had spent his whole long life on the certain side of an ambush. He had never once been on this side of it. He opened a channel to the Armada, because the reaving liked to speak to the things it ate, and now, for the first time, it was the reaving being spoken to. His voice, when it came, had lost its smile. "This is not your fight," Sarun said into the dark, in the trade tongue, so the girl could hear it, so everyone could hear it. "This is a grain moon. It is nothing. It cannot pay you. We did not strike at you or yours. Turn around, fleet, and we will leave this place and find another, and you will have spent your great crossing on nothing. There is no profit here for anyone." The answer came from the far shepherd, and it was spoken by a woman named Captain Imelda Forsyth, who commanded Earth's mightiest armada, and her voice was not angry, which was somehow worse than angry. "You have the wrong idea about us," she said. "You think we crossed this distance for profit. We crossed it because a girl on that moon asked anyone who could hear her for help. That is the whole reason. There is no other reason. There does not need to be." She let that sit for a moment in the dark. "You said this fight is not ours," Forsyth went on. "You are right. It was never a fight. You came to strip 11,040 people who cannot defend themselves, and you have done it 411 times to 411 worlds, because you decided long ago that no one would ever come. I am here to correct that decision. Not yours alone, the decision itself, the whole law you built your life on. I am here to make it false forever." Sarun Vesh, who had emptied 411 worlds, found that he had nothing to say. "You are going to choose," Forsyth said. And I am going to give you a better choice than you ever gave a colony. Power down your stripping arms. All of them. Cut your engines to drift, and you will leave this system alive. Every crew, every hull, and you will carry home what you saw here, and you will tell the rest of the Reaving that the dark answers now. That is the choice. Take it. In the signal shack, Tova Lin listened to the human captain offer the raiders their lives, and she did not understand it, because she had spent 4 days believing the strippers deserved to be unmade. She keyed her channel to Gareth, whose small ship still sat at the gate, dark and quiet, between her world and the wall. "Why," she said, "why are you letting them go? They came to kill us all." "Because we are not them," Gareth said. "That is the whole answer, Tova. If we cross the deep to save 11,000 people, and then empty 300 ships for the joy of it, then we are just a bigger Reaving, and the dark stays exactly as cruel as it was. We did not come to be the new thing that empties worlds. We came to be the thing that stops them. There is a difference, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered. Watch. They will not take the choice. Their kind never does the first time. And watch what we do then." Sarun Vesh did not take the choice. He could not. He was a packmaster of the Henraxi Reaving, and his people had stripped worlds since before the human captain species had left its cradle, and the first law of the deep was carved so deep into him that he could not believe it had truly broken, even with 9,000 proofs of it filling his sky. He told himself the Armada would not fire. He told himself a fleet that offered mercy was a fleet that was soft, and soft things could be rushed, and a hunter who lost his nerve was already dead. He gave the order he had given 411 times before. "Take the world," Sarun said. "All ships, run the gate, strip it fast." 288 Reaving ships threw themselves forward in a single desperate wall, past the small dark scout, toward the silver fields and the 11,040 people standing in them. And Earth's mightiest armada answered. It did not answer with annihilation. That was the thing the Reaving never understood, then or after. The Far Shepherd did not give the order to kill. It gave the order to stop, and stopping, in the hands of 9,000 human warships, was a more terrible art than killing had ever been. The Armada fired in a single coordinated pulse, and every shot was aimed, and not one shot was aimed to kill. The human gunners, who had trained their whole lives for exactly this, who had practiced the unmaking of stripping fleets, the way the colonists practiced the harvest, reached out across the dark and took the Reaving apart with surgical precision. They shot away engines, they shot away stripping arms, they shot away grappling rigs and weapon mounts, and the long, cruel peeling tools the strippers used on worlds. They cut the claws off 288 ships in under 4 minutes, and they left the crews alive inside hulls that could no longer hunt, drifting, helpless, harmless, exactly as helpless as the farm moon had been an hour before. It was the most precise act of violence the deep had ever seen, and it spilled almost no blood, and that was the point. The colonists in the silver fields watched 288 raider ships go dark and drift, declawed, ruined as weapons and whole as ships, and they understood, slowly, that the Armada had spared the very people who had come to murder them, and that the sparing was not weakness. It was the opposite of weakness. It was the deepest strength any of them had ever seen, the strength to win completely and choose not to make it slaughter. Sarun Vesh sat on the bridge of the Long Hunger, which now drifted clawless with the rest, its engines gone, its stripping arms gone, its long life ended in 4 minutes, and he was alive, and his crew was alive, and he did not understand why. The channel from the Far Shepherd opened one more time. "You are still breathing," Captain Forsyth said. "So is every crew in your fleet. Remember that, when you go home. We could have ended you. We chose to end only the part of you that hunts the helpless. Now drift, and watch, because there is one thing left for you to see, and then you may carry it home." Sarun Vesh, packmaster of 411 emptied worlds, drifted in the dark above a farm moon he had failed to take, and he watched. What Sarun Vesh watched was the thing he could least have imagined, which was the Armada turning gentle. The same 9,000 warships that had just declawed his entire fleet in 4 minutes now broke their great formations apart and came in toward the farm moon, slow and careful, the way a person walks into a room full of frightened children. The Far Shepherd held its place at the heart of the dark, but the smaller ships, which were still each larger than a stripper, drifted down toward Aldwin's Reach with their weapons cold and their bays open, and from those bays came not soldiers but supply. The Bright Verdict had not crossed the deep with only guns. It had crossed with everything. That was what the Armada was for. It carried grain it did not need, because a farm moon under siege had spent 9 days eating its stores. It carried medics, because frightened people in rock cellars got sick and got hurt. It carried engineers who could rebuild a signal shack into a real relay so that the next call from Aldwin's Reach would not have to travel 9 days to find a friend. It carried water purifiers and seed stock and warm clothing and 10,000 small mercies that no raider had ever once brought to a world. The colonists stood in the silver fields and watched the iron mountains come down to feed them, and some of them could not stand anymore and simply sat in the grain and shook. Tova Lin left the signal shack for the first time in 4 days. She walked out into the field on legs that did not entirely work, and she looked up at the smaller ships drifting down with their bays open, and at the Far Shepherd hanging in the dark like a second star, and she found that her careful voice, which had not broken through 4 days of siege, broke now, when the danger was over, the way a voice always does. She did not try to stop it. She had earned it. A shuttle came down in the field near her, smaller than the warships but still vast against the grain, and a ramp lowered, and a man walked down it. He was 51 years old, and had a face that did not waste expressions, and he was not wearing armor, and he walked across the silver grain toward the signal shack, like a man who had been told exactly where to go. Tova knew the walk before she knew the face. She had spent 4 days with the voice that owned it. "You kept talking," Hollis Gareth said, when he reached her. "Through all of it. You never let the line go dead. Do you know what that did? It told us, every minute, that there were still people alive down here to come for. If you had gone quiet, even for an hour, we would have feared the worst and pushed harder and arrived broken. You kept us calm by staying calm. You held a shield over 11,000 people with nothing but your voice, and you did it for 4 days, and you are 17 years old." Tova looked at the man she had trusted over her grandfather's certainty, and she said the only thing she had left. "You came," she said. "He told me no one ever comes. He told me the deep was empty, and we would have to save ourselves. And you came." Gareth looked up at the Armada filling the sky, 9,000 hulls that had crossed real distance to answer a girl's call, and he was quiet for a moment. "He was right about one thing," Gareth said. "You did save yourselves. You sent the call. You sent it 61 times when 60 had failed. You kept it open when fear told you to run. You are the reason this worked, Tova. You and not us. We only did the part that comes after someone refuses to give up. The deep is not empty. It never was. It was just full of people who had been taught that no one would answer, so they stopped calling. You did not stop. That is the whole difference. Teach it to the next world. They will need to hear it from someone who lived it." High above the silver fields, drifting clawless in the cold, the packmaster Sarun Vesh watched the Armada feed the world he had come to strip, and something in him that had been hard for 411 worlds began, very slowly, to crack. He had built his life on the certainty that the deep was cruel, that the strong took and the weak were taken, that no one crossed real distance for strangers. It was not just a tactic for him. It was a faith. It was the thing that had let him empty 411 worlds and sleep at night, because if the deep was cruel by nature, then he was only its weather, only the storm, blameless as a storm. The faith required that no one ever come. The faith required the dark to stay empty. And he had just watched the dark fill with 9,000 ships that came for grain farmers and then fed them. The channel from the Far Shepherd opened to him one last time, and it was not Captain Forsyth this time. It was the small scout captain Hollis Gareth, speaking from the surface of the world Sarun had failed to take, and the words were meant for the packmaster alone, though the whole drifting reaving heard them. "Sarun Vesh," Gareth said, "we know your name. We know your tally, 411 worlds. We have the record of every one of them, not because we hunted it, but because the survivors you left in the tunnels eventually found their voices and told us. You think you left nothing behind. You left witnesses. You always left witnesses. And they remembered, and they waited, and today they got to watch. Saroon said nothing. There was nothing to say. Here is what happens now, Gareth went on. Your fleet drifts here for 30 days, clawless, while this world heals, and our engineers builded a relay that reaches us in an hour instead of 9 days. You will watch the whole healing. You will watch 11,040 people who you came to murder build something that makes sure your kind can never surprise a colony again. And on the 31st day, we will give your ships back their engines, only their engines, nothing that hunts, and you will go home, and you will carry the truth with you, and you will say it to the reaving plainly, and it is this. The dark answers now. The first law of the deep is broken. Every call gets heard. There is no helpless world left in this sky, because behind every grain moon and every farm station and every frightened girl with a signal shack, there is an armada that has decided to come. Tell them, make them believe it, because the next packmaster who falls on a colony will not find a small scout at the gate. He will find what you found, and we may not be in the mercy mood twice. Saroon Vesh, packmaster of the Henraxi Reaving, sat in the dark above a world he had failed to take, surrounded by his clawless fleet, and he understood that he was being sent home, not as a prisoner and not as a corpse, but as a messenger, and that the message would do more damage to the Reaving than any weapon could, because the message would take away the one thing the Reaving had always needed, which was a galaxy of victims who believed no one was coming. He thought about refusing. He thought about the long dishonor of carrying such a message home. And then he looked again at the silver fields, at the iron mountains feeding the small people, at the colossal calm of an armada that had won everything and spilled almost nothing, and he understood that there was no honor left to protect. The honor had died with the faith. The deep was not cruel by nature. It had only been cruel because the strong had agreed to make it so, and the weak had been taught not to call for help. Humans had never agreed to it, and now the agreement was over. Down in the silver field, Tova Lin stood beside the scout captain and watched the armada work, and she asked the question that the whole sky was asking. "Why do you keep a fleet this big?" she said. 9,000 ships. You could rule the whole deep with it. You could be the new Reaving, 10 times worse. Why spend it on grain moons that cannot pay you? Gareth looked at her, and for the first time his face wasted an expression, and the expression was something close to grief. "Because we were a grain moon once," he said. "A long time ago, before we had any of this. We called into the dark when something came for us, and the dark did not answer, and we found out exactly what it costs to be helpless, and alone with the storm coming. We remember it. We built the bright verdict so that no one would ever have to find that out again. That is the whole of it, Tova. We do not keep this fleet because we are strong. We keep it because we remember being weak. The day we forget is the day we become the thing we crossed the deep to stop. So we do not forget. We answer the call. Every time. That is who we decided to be, and we get to decide it again every time a girl on a farm moon sends a 61st message into the empty dark and prays that this once, somebody is listening." Tova Lin looked up at the 9,000 ships that had heard her, and at the clawless raiders drifting above the silver fields, and at the man who had crossed real distance because she had asked, and she stopped being afraid of the dark for the rest of her life. Above them all, Saroon Vesh began to compose the message he would carry home, and with every word of it, he felt the long, cruel certainty of his people die a little more, and he found, to his own surprise, that he was almost glad. But the Reaving was larger than 300 ships, and it did not forgive. On the 11th day of the healing, while the engineers were still raising the relay tower out of the silver fields, the listening chair caught something far out in the deep that made Tova Lin go cold. She had been trained for less than 2 weeks, but Hollis Gareth had taught her to read the old crude scopes, and the scopes were filling with returns. Many returns. more than 300, more than 3,000. She keyed the channel to the far shepherd with a steady voice, because a steady voice was a shield and she would hold it. "There is something coming," she said, "from the deep, the same way you came, but from the other side. The scopes cannot count it. It is bigger than the first fleet. Much bigger." The answer came from Captain Imelda Forsyth, and it was unsurprised, which frightened Tova more than alarm would have. "We see it," Forsyth said. "We have seen it for an hour. It is the rest of them, Tova. The first fleet was a single pack. This is the hand. It is what the reaving sends when a pack fails to come home, and a pack always reports before it dies, and the one you watched us declaw managed to scream for help before our guns reached it. We expected this. Stay in your chair. Keep your people deep. Watch the dark behind your star, because it is about to fill again, and this time it will not be us first." It was not us first. The thing that came out of the deep on the 11th day was the Henraxi hand, and it was the true might of the reaving, the war host that the 411 world tally had been built to feed, and it was 40,000 ships. They did not come loose and lazy the way Saroon's pack had come. They came in a closed iron fist, layer upon layer, a fortress of hulls so deep that the colony's scopes simply gave up and showed it as a single growing shadow that ate the stars behind the farm moon's pale sun. At the heart of the hand rode a vessel that made even the far shepherd look modest, a black command fortress called the Devouring Crown, and on its bridge sat the High Reaver Aunt Halakar, who answered to no one and who had never lost a world he wanted. Aunt Halakar had come for two things. He had come to take Aldwin's reach, because the reaving did not abandon a marked world, and he had come to erase the fleet that had dared to break the first law of the deep, because if that breaking was allowed to stand, if word spread that the dark answered now, then every victim in the galaxy would start to call, and the reaving fed on a galaxy that did not call. He understood the stakes better than Saroon ever had. He understood that this was not a battle over one grain moon. It was a battle over whether the reaving could exist at all in a sky where someone came. So he brought 40,000 ships to make sure it could not. Down in the silver fields, the people of Aldwin's Reach saw the second shadow grow in their sky and felt the 4 days of fear come back all at once. They had only just begun to believe they were safe. The relay tower was half built. The children had only just begun to run unafraid beneath the iron. And now a darkness was coming out of the deep that made the first fleet look like a handful of stones. And the colonists understood, the way frightened people always understand the worst thing first, that the strippers had not given up, that the strippers had only gone to fetch the rest of themselves. Old Orin Sable gathered the people again, but he did not send them down into the rock this time. He had learned something in the last 11 days that he had not known in 80 years, and the thing he had learned was where to look. So he told them to stay in the fields and to keep their faces turned toward the human ships, toward the far shepherd hanging in the dark, because the old grainkeeper had decided that whatever came, he would face it standing in the open beside the fleet that had answered, and not cowering in a hole believing the deep was empty. He had believed that lie for 80 years, and it had nearly cost him everything. He would not believe it for 1 hour more. In the signal shack, Tova Lin watched the 40,000 ship shadow swallow the stars and made herself breathe. She had been a listener for 11 days. She was not ready for this. No one would have been ready for this. But she keyed the channel to the far shepherd with a voice she forced to stay level, because a level voice was a shield, and her people were standing in the open, and they needed the shield more than ever. "Tell me the truth," she said to Captain Forsyth. "The way the scout captain always tells me the truth. Can you stop that? It is 40,000. I can read the scopes now. You have 9,000 here. I have done the math, and the math says you cannot." The answer came back, and it was the same calm that had carried her through the first siege, and underneath the calm there was something that sounded, impossibly, like patience, as though the human captain had known this exact question was coming and had been waiting for the chance to answer it. "Tova," Forsyth said, "you have learned to read the scopes, and that is good. A listener must read the scopes. But you have made the same error the High Reaver made, and I am going to fix it for you the way I am about to fix it for him. You counted the 9,000 ships you can see. You did not count the ones you cannot. We did not bring our whole armada through your door, child. We never do. We bring the part that fits the problem, and we keep the rest folded in the dark where the enemy cannot read it, listening, waiting to see how large the thing that comes to stop us truly is. The Reaving has just told us how large it is, 40,000. Thank them for being honest. Now keep your people looking the right way, the way you did before, because the dark behind us is about to fill, and this time it is not going to stop at 9,000. He brought 40,000 ships to make sure the Reaving could survive in a galaxy where someone came. He had no idea that the someone had been counting him the entire time and had brought more. He opened a channel to the human armada, and his voice was not the smiling cruelty of a packmaster. It was the flat certainty of a thing that had never been told no. "Fleet of strangers," Aunt Halakar said. "You declawed one of my packs, and you fed a world that belongs to us. You were brave, and bravery is a small animal's last sound. I have brought the hand, 40,000 hulls. You have 9,000. I have counted you, and you are not enough, and I am going to take this world while you watch, and then I am going to take your fleet apart hull by hull and carry the pieces home so the galaxy remembers what happens to anyone who answers a call. Stand down, and I will let your 9,000 crews flee into the dark. Stand in my path, and there will not be enough of you left to bury." The colonists in the silver fields, who had only just stopped being afraid, felt the old terror come flooding back, because 40,000 was a number they could not even picture, and 9,000 was the only thing standing between them and it. In the signal shack, Tova Lin gripped the edge of her grandfather's desk and waited for the human captain's voice to crack the way her own wanted to. It did not crack. "Hi, Reaver," Captain Forsyth said, and her voice was as calm as it had been to Saroon, calmer even, the calm of someone who has already done the arithmetic and does not like talking about a settled thing. "You have made the same mistake your packmaster made, only larger. You think this is about the count. You counted 9,000 of us and 40,000 of you, and you decided the larger number wins. Let me correct you before it costs your whole hand instead of just your packs. We did not bring 9,000 ships, because 9,000 was all we had. We brought 9,000, because 9,000 was enough to feed a grain moon and declaw a stripping pack. You are a different problem, so you get a different answer." She let that sit in the dark for a moment, the way she had with Saroon. "Look behind us," Forsyth said. "Not at our 9,000. Past them. At the deep we came out of. You have been counting the wrong sky. And the dark behind the far shepherd, which the hand had thought was empty, stopped being empty. The rest of the bright verdict came through." Tova Lin watched it happen, and she would spend the rest of her long life trying to describe it to people who had not seen it, and she would always fail, because there were no words built for it. The 9,000 ships that had answered her call had been the forward edge. They had been the hand the armada extended through the door. Behind them, folded into the deep on a path the Reaving could not read, the true mass of Earth's mightiest armada had been waiting the entire time, holding station in the dark, listening, because that was what the bright verdict did before it acted. It listened. It let the enemy commit. It let the enemy count the wrong number and grow certain. And then it arrived. The deep behind the far shepherd filled the way the sky over Aldwin's reach had filled, except that it did not stop at 9,000, and it did not stop at 40,000. Hull after hull after hull unfolded out of the dark, gray and blunt and enormous, in walls and wedges and slow vast spheres, until the count that the colony's scopes could not perform became a thing no one needed to perform, because the armada now stretched across so much sky that the far moon's star was a small thing lost among iron. The full bright verdict was 110,000 warships, and it had brought every one of them, because a girl had asked for help, and the armada had decided, before it ever left human space, that whatever came to stop it would be met by everything. The High Reaver Aunt Halakar, who had never been told no, looked at 110,000 human warships filling the dark behind a grain moon he had marked, and for the first time in his long, cruel life, he understood the feeling that Sarun Vesh had felt on the fourth day, the thin, cold thread that had no name, except that for Aunt it was not thin. It was a flood. He had brought 40,000 ships to erase a fleet of 9,000. He was now outnumbered nearly 3-1 by a force that had led him believe the opposite, that had shown him a hand and hidden the body behind it, that had wanted him to commit the entire hand before it revealed how badly he had miscounted. He understood too late that the 9,000 had been the bait, the same way Sarun's small scout had been the gate, and that he had walked the entire might of the reaving into a sky that the humans had measured to the last hull before he ever arrived. "You see it now," Forsyth said, into the silence where the High Reaver's certainty had been. "The 9,000 were never the Armada. The 9,000 were the question. You are the answer to it. You brought your whole hand because you understood, correctly, that this was about whether the reaving can exist in a galaxy where someone comes. So I brought the whole verdict, so that the answer would be complete, and witnessed, and final. You wanted to make sure no one ever dared answer a call again. I am here to make sure that you, specifically, with your entire war host watching, learn that the call will always be answered, no matter how large the thing that comes to stop it. Aunt Halakar did the only thing a creature like him could do, which was to refuse to believe it even now. He had 40,000 ships. He had never lost. He told the hand to attack, all of it, the whole iron fist thrown at once at the human line, because a thing that has never been told no does not know how to hear it, even when the sky is screaming it at him. 40,000 reaving ships threw themselves at the bright verdict in the largest charge the deep had ever seen, and the colonists in the silver fields fell to their knees, certain that the end had come for everyone, the humans and the farmers alike. And Earth's mightiest armada answered, and once again it did not answer with annihilation. This was the thing that the hand, like the pack before it, could not understand. 110,000 human warships had the power to turn the entire Henraxi hand into a cloud of ash and not feel the effort. Every gunner in the fleet knew it. Every captain knew it. The High Reaver had handed them, in his fury, the perfect justification: 40,000 ships charging a grain moon with intent to murder 11,000 people. No court in the deep would have blamed the verdict for ending them. And the verdict chose not to. Instead, the Armada did the same thing it had done to Sarun's pack, but at a scale that the deep would speak of for 1,000 years. 110,000 warships fired a single coordinated pulse, every shot aimed, not one shot aimed to kill, and they took the entire Henraxi hand apart with a precision that should not have been possible at that scale, and was possible only because the humans had trained their whole lives for exactly this, and had decided, as a people, that winning and slaughtering were not the same act. They shot away 40,000 sets of engines. They shot away 40,000 pairs of stripping arms. They cut the claws off the entire war host of the reaving in under 9 minutes, and they left the crews alive inside hulls that could no longer hunt, drifting, helpless, harmless, an iron field of declawed strippers stretching across the dark where a fortress had been. It was the largest act of restraint in the history of the deep. The Armada won total victory over 40,000 ships, and it spilled almost no blood, and the not spilling was the entire message, written so large that no one in the galaxy could ever claim not to have seen it. The High Reaver Aunt Halakar sat on the bridge of the devouring crown, which now drifted clawless with the rest of his hand, its engines gone, its arms gone, its war ended in 9 minutes, and he was alive, and his whole war host was alive, and he did not understand why, because in his entire long life he had never once let a defeated thing live, and now the thing that had defeated him had let him live 40,000 times over. The channel from the far shepherd opened to him, and it was Captain Forsyth, and her voice had not changed at all. "You are still breathing," she said. "So is every crew in your hand. Look at them, High Reaver. 40,000 ships, every one of them clawless, every one of them alive. We could have ended the reaving today, completely, in 9 minutes, and no power in this sky would have spoken against us. We chose instead to end only the part of you that hunts the helpless. That choice was not weakness. You understand that now, the way your packmaster came to understand it. It was the most expensive thing in the deep. It is far easier to kill 40,000 ships than to spare them. We paid the harder price on purpose, because we want the lesson to outlive you, and a dead enemy teaches nothing. Bont Halakar found his voice, and it was a smaller thing than it had been. Why, he said. It was the only word he had. Because we were a grain moon once, Forsyth said, the same answer the scout captain had given the girl. The answer that was the whole of it. We called into the dark and the dark did not answer, and we learned what it costs to be helpless with the storm coming. We built this fleet so that no one would ever have to learn it again, not even you. You came here believing the strong take and the weak are taken, and no one crosses the deep for strangers. We have just spent the entire might of 2 empires proving you wrong in front of your own war host. The first law of the deep is broken, High Reaver. It broke the day a girl on that moon sent a 61st message and we heard it. Everything since then has only been the size of the proof. The High Reaver Aunt Halakar, who had never been told no, sat in his clawless fortress above a grain moon he had failed to take, surrounded by 40,000 declawed ships and 110,000 human warships and 11,040 people he had come to murder, and he understood that the reaving was over, not destroyed, over, because everything it was had been built on a law that had just been broken so completely, so publicly, in front of so many witnesses, that it could never be believed again, and a thing that cannot be believed cannot rule, and the reaving had ruled by belief alone. Down in the silver fields, Tova Lin rose from her knees and looked up at the impossible sky, at the 110,000 ships and the 40,000 clawless ones drifting among them, and she keyed the channel to the scout captain whose small ship still sat at the gate, dark and quiet, the way it had through all of it. You let them all live, she said. Both fleets, 300, and now 40,000. Every one. Yes, Gareth said. They will go home, and they will tell the reaving what happened, she said, and the reaving will know it cannot win. And it will fall apart, not because you killed it, but because you took away the lie it lived on. Yes, Gareth said again, and she could hear, even through the channel, that he was almost proud of her for understanding it so fast. That is how you end a thing forever, Tova, not by killing it. Killing makes a wound, and wounds make revenge, and revenge brings the next hand, and the one after that. We did not make a wound today. We made a witness. 40,000 witnesses, and a High Reaver, and a Packmaster, and a girl in a signal shack, all of whom will tell the same true story until there is no one left in the deep who believes the old law. A killed enemy comes back larger. A witness who tells the truth ends the war for good. We did not come here to win a battle, Tova. We came here to end the reason for the battle. There is a difference, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered. The bright verdict held the entire clawless hand for 30 days, alongside Saroon's smaller pack, and it made every one of them watch the same healing, the relay rising out of the silver fields, the children running unafraid beneath the iron, 11,040 people who had been a number on a tally becoming, in front of 40,000 witnesses, simply people. The High Reaver Aunt Halakar was given the same document Saroon had been given, the list of all 11,040 names, and the same sentence. Not death, memory. Read them on the way home. Know exactly who you would have erased. He read them. It changed him the way it had changed Saroon, only there was more of him to change, and so the changing went deeper. By the end he was an old creature who had learned, far too late and far too completely, that the dark he had ruled by fear had never been his at all, and that the only thing that had ever held it together was a lie that the humans had walked 150,000 ships across the deep to break. On the 31st day, the Armada gave the hand back its engines, only its engines, nothing that hunted, and the war host of the Henraxi reaving folded into the deep and went home, clawless, carrying a message and a list of names and a truth that would unmake an empire one telling at a time. The High Reaver's last act before he folded away was to open the channel one final time. You have not just broken a law, Aunt Halakar said. You have broken a hunger. The reaving will not survive what you have made us carry home. I do not know what my people will become without it, but I know they will not become this. Never again, because no one will let themselves be prey once they know that the dark answers. You have killed the Reaving by refusing to kill a single one of us. I did not know such a weapon existed. I have spent my whole life believing the only strength was the strength to take. You have shown me, with 110,000 ships and almost no blood, that the only strength that ever lasts is the strength to come when you are called, and to stop when you have won. I will carry it home. I will say it plainly. Go and answer the next one. Then the hand was gone, and the sky over Aldwin's reach held only the bright verdict, and the bright verdict had work yet to finish. The work yet to finish was the healing, and it took the rest of the season, and the watching of it changed both clawless fleets more than any battle could have. They watched the engineers of the bright verdict build a relay tower at the edge of the silver fields, a thing of clean gray metal that reached up out of the grain like a hand, and they watched it light up on the first test and reach across the deep to human space in 51 minutes instead of 9 days. They watched 11,040 people who had spent their lives believing no one would come learn, in the span of a month, that they were never alone again. They watched the children come up out of the rock cellars and run in the fields beneath the iron mountains, unafraid, because the things in the sky were friends now, and children learn what the sky means faster than anyone. Sarun Vesh watched all of it from the bridge of the Long Hunger, and he did not look away. The packmaster who had laughed at a distress call had become, somewhere across those days of watching, a creature he no longer recognized, an old thing, learning a lesson far too late to be of any use to the 411 worlds already behind him. He thought of the child of 2 on the name list whose face he would never know, and how close she had come to being nothing, and he found that he could not stop thinking of her, and that this was the punishment, and that it was a just one. On the day the relay first reached human space, the Armada gave both fleets back their engines. Only the engines, nothing that hunted. The stripping arms stayed dark forever, cut away and left drifting in the cold, as a monument that any passing ship would see and understand. The grappling rigs were gone. The peeling tools were gone. Sarun's pack and the High Reaver's 40,000-strong hand could now go home, and only home, and they could never again fall on a helpless world, because the parts of them that did the falling had been surgically removed by people who had decided that mercy and consequence were the same act when done correctly. Sarun Vesh took his clawless ship to the edge of the system, and there he stopped, and he opened a channel to the Far Shepherd one final time. "I will carry your message," he said. "I will say it plainly to the Reaving, and to every world that will listen. The dark answers now. I did not believe it. I built my whole long life on its being a lie, and you have made it true in front of me, and I cannot unsee it, so I will tell them, and I think, when I tell them, that the Reaving will end, not because you destroyed it, but because you took away the thing it fed on, which was a galaxy that believed no one was coming. A people cannot strip worlds that are no longer afraid. You did not kill us. You did something worse and better. You made us unnecessary." Captain Imelda Forsyth answered him from the bridge of Earth's mightiest armada, and her voice, for the first time, was not hard. "Then go and be unnecessary," she said. "There are worse fates, Packmaster. Most of us spend our whole lives trying to reach it. Go home, tell the truth, and if you ever find a world with something coming for it and no one answering, send us its position. We will hear it. We always hear it now." The clawless fleet of the Henraxi Reaving folded into the deep and went home, and it carried a message that would unmake 411 worlds of fear, one telling at a time, until the law that the Reaving had carved into the dark for 10,000 years simply stopped being believed, and a thing that is no longer believed is a thing that no longer rules. The Armada stayed 19 more days. It finished the relay. It filled the colony's stores past the brim. It left behind a small permanent garrison, 2 warships and 100 people, not to rule Aldwin's reach, but to answer its door, so that the silver fields would never again be more than an hour from help. And then, on the 50th day, the bright verdict gathered itself out of the sky, and prepared to fold back into the deep and go listening again, because somewhere out in the dark there was always another world sending a 61st message and praying that someone heard. Before it left, the scout captain Hollis Gareth came down to the Silverfields one last time to say goodbye to the girl whose voice had held the line. He found Tova Lin in the signal shack, which she had not left for good, because she had decided what she wanted to be. She was at the new relay now, the clean gray one that reached human space in 51 minutes, and she was listening to the dark the way Gareth had taught her without ever meaning to teach her, the way he had listened for 19 years. "I am keeping the chair," she told him. "The listening chair. Someone has to sit at the edge of this system and hear the calls that come in. I learned how to keep talking and how to keep a voice steady when everything is ending. I am good at it. I want to be the thing for the next world that you were for mine. I want to be the one who answers the door." Gareth looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something he had not done in 19 years on the edge of the deep. He smiled. "Then you are one of us now," he said. "Not because we recruited you, because you decided it, the same way we decided it, for the same reason. You know exactly what it costs to be helpless and alone with the storm coming, and you have decided that no one else should ever have to find that out. That is the whole of it, Tova. That is the only thing that ever made us what we are. Welcome to the listening. It is the most important chair in the deep, and almost no one ever wants to sit in it." He gave her a small device before he left, a relay key that tied her chair directly to the bright verdict, so that when a call came to Aldwin's Reach that the garrison could not answer alone, Tova Lin could reach up and pull on Earth's mightiest armada the way a child pulls on a rope to ring a bell, and the bell would be heard, and the armada would come. Then the Far Shepherd folded into the deep, and 9,000 human warships went with it, and the sky over the silver fields was empty again. But it was a different empty now. Tova Lin stood in the grain and looked up at it and felt none of the old fear, because she knew, the way she knew her own name, that the emptiness was a lie. The dark was not empty, it was full of listeners. It was full of people who had decided that a call was a promise, and if she ever needed them, all she had to do was send the message, and keep talking, and they would come, faster than anything that hunted, because they had crossed the whole deep once already to prove it. Years passed. Aldwin's Reach grew. The silver grain still grew silver under the pale star. But now there were 2 warships in orbit, and a relay tower that touched the deep, and a listening chair that was never empty, because Tova Lin sat in it, and when she could not, she had trained others to sit in it, and the colony that had once believed no one would come became known across that whole quarter of the deep as the world that always answered. Frontier stations sent their calls there first. Grain moons and ice colonies and lonely stations on the edge of the maps learned that there was a girl, and then a woman, and then an old woman, at Aldwin's Reach who would hear them and keep them talking and reach up and ring the bell. And the bell was always answered. The Henraxi reaving was never seen on that frontier again. The message Sarun Vesh carried home did exactly what Forsyth had said it would. It did not destroy the reaving with fire. It destroyed it with truth. A people whose entire economy was built on falling upon the helpless cannot survive in a galaxy where there are no helpless worlds, where every grain moon is one ring of a bell away from an armada, where the first law of the deep has been spoken false in front of a witness who cannot stop telling it. The reaving's packs began to come apart. Some turned to honest trade, some scattered into the deep and were not heard from. Sarun Vesh himself, the records would later say, spent his last years going from world to world, telling the survivors of his own 411 crimes the same thing over and over, that the dark answered now, that no one was alone, that he had seen it with his own old eyes. It was the only restitution a creature like him could make, and he made it until he died, and some of the worlds he had once emptied forgave him for it, which was more than he had ever expected and more, he always said, than he deserved. The deep changed. Slowly, one telling at a time, the oldest and cruelest law of the dark gave way. Worlds stopped believing that no one would come, and when worlds stopped believing that, they start calling, and when worlds call, the listeners hear them, and the Armada answers. It was not a sudden thing. It took a generation. But the day came when a frightened colony on the far edge of everything sent its first distress call into the dark, and did not wait 9 days, and did not send it 61 times, because it already knew, the way children know what the sky means, that the call would be heard. The fear that the reaving had farmed for 10,000 years was simply gone, and a thing that is gone does not come back. Tova Lin was very old when the last message came to her chair, and she did not know it would be the last. It came from a world she had never heard of, far out past the edge of the good maps, a small ice colony with something coming for it, and no defenses that mattered. The voice on the call was young. It was a boy's voice, careful and even, repeating the same words over and over in the cheap trade tongue. "This is Holloway Station," the boy said. "We are 3,012 people. A raiding fleet is 8 days out and closing. We have no warships. We are asking anyone who can hear us. Please, we are asking for help." Tova Lin, who was 81 years old and had sat in the listening chair for 64 of those years, leaned toward the relay, and she sent back the 4 words she had received herself, a lifetime ago, on a night when she had not slept in 2 days and had stopped believing in salvation. "We heard you. Hold." Then she reached up and rang the bell. She kept the boy talking, the way she had been kept talking a lifetime ago. She learned his name. She learned about Holloway Station, 3,012 people on a ball of ice, who mined nothing anyone wanted, and asked nothing of the deep, except to be left alone. She learned that his grandmother had told him the same lie that Tova's grandfather had told her, the lie that the deep was empty, and that a colony was its own only salvation, and Tova Lin smiled at that, because she had heard it before, and she knew exactly how it ended now. She told the boy to keep talking, and not to let the line go dead, because a voice that keeps talking tells the rescuers, every minute, that there are still people alive to come for. The boy did not understand why that mattered. He would understand in 8 days. She had not understood either, once. And 8 days out, the boy on Holloway Station watched the empty dark behind his own star, because the old woman on the channel had told him to bring his people up out of the shelters and look the right way, and at the hour she had promised, the dark stopped being empty. The Armada had a new flagship now, larger even than the old Far Shepherd, and it had a new captain, and it had 9,000 younger hulls behind it, but it had the same name and the same purpose and the same single unbreakable rule, which was that every call gets answered, every time, because the day they forget is the day they become the thing they cross the deep to stop. It unfolded out of the dark above Holloway Station, the way it had unfolded above Aldwin's Reach a lifetime before, gray and unhurried and enormous, and 3,012 people who had been told their whole lives that no one would come, stood on the ice and wept, because someone had. Tova Lin heard the boy's voice break with relief over the channel, and she smiled, and she sat back in her chair, the most important chair in the deep, the one almost no one ever wanted to sit in, and she listened to an Armada keep the promise she had taught the dark to keep. She had been a frightened girl in a tin signal shack once, certain that the deep was empty and that she would have to be her own salvation. She had been wrong about the empty part and right about the salvation, because she had saved her world by refusing to stop calling, and then she had spent the rest of her long life making sure no one else would ever have to call as many as 61 times before the dark answered. The deep was never empty again. It was full of listeners, and every one of them had learned the same thing from the same place, from a farm moon that grew silver grain, and a girl who would not stop talking, and an Armada that crossed the whole dark to prove a single point to a galaxy that had forgotten it. The point was simple, and it outlived everyone who first spoke it, and it spread to the farthest worlds on the farthest maps until even the raiders believed it and laid down their claws. No one is alone in the dark. Send the call. Keep talking. Look the right way. We are already moving. We are coming faster than anything that hunts you. And we always, always answer the door.